Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will talk about the Homeowners Association that wants me to uninstall my gate. I knew the Homeowners Association had crossed from quirky into absolutely unreal the moment the brand new board president, lean, zipper-tight posture, voice like a gym coach's whistle, showed up on my porch at 8:03 a.m. sharp holding a laminated aerial printout of my backyard. He tapped the glossy square that represented my shed and opened with, "We need you to take down your side gate so we can have planned access to your shed for park equipment." Not, "Could we maybe borrow a corner?" Not, "Do you have space for a rake?" A direct demand that I partially surrender a secured portion of my property for indefinite communal storage. That single sentence was the spark. I just didn't realize how dry their little brush pile of overreach already was. My lot sits at the fat end of a cul-de-sac, pie slice shaped, narrow street frontage, then widening fast until the rear fence spans almost twice the width of the front. Beyond that rear fence is the association's so-called park. In truth, a greenbelt strip with a path, a bench, a handful of decorative trees, and a drainage swale dressed up in brochure language. I installed a solid side gate and a weatherproof resin shed soon after closing, because the geometry gives me a tucked-away corner perfect for storing my own tools and kayak gear. The shed sits just inside the gate so I can wheel the mower straight out, angled deliberately to avoid the view from the path. Everything is well inside my surveyed boundary. There is no recorded easement, no shared utility box inside my fence, nothing that would justify anyone else strolling in. Caspin did not arrive alone. Flanking him, Dahlia, a relentlessly smiling retiree gripping a yellow legal pad already ruled into neat columns, and Kirk, the newest board member, wearing reflective wraparound sunglasses despite overcast skies like he expected glare from my azaleas. Dahlia used a tone you reserve for announcing free cupcakes in a break room. "We voted," she said, "to centralize storage for volunteer landscaping tools. Your shed is perfectly located. We'll need you to uninstall the gate and leave the area open during daylight hours. We're targeting next Saturday so we can start staging." She wrote while she talked, already memorializing my compliance in real time. I told them calmly the answer was no. The shed and gate are entirely on my deeded lot. There is no common element inside my fence. Nobody stores anything there without a written agreement I initiate. Caspin's jaw tightened. He pivoted to a sentence in the covenant saying, "Owners shall not unreasonably withhold access necessary to maintain community amenities." I knew it word for word. Months earlier, a neighbor asked me about a drainage cleanout on his lot, so I read the governing documents end to end. That clause is limited to existing easements and defined maintenance tasks, utilities, drainage, shared perimeter walls. It does not transform private structures into free association warehouses, because the board thinks the location is perfect. He tried to steamroll. "If you decline a cooperative approach, we'll fine you for inhibiting maintenance functions." That is not how fines work. Under ordinary U.S. HOA law principles and our own covenants, fines require 1. A published rule, 2. Notice of a specific alleged violation, 3. An opportunity for a hearing, 4. A recorded board decision. Not donating your shed is not a violation. I suggested if the association wants storage, it can propose in the budget a small prefabricated shed on common ground, or rent a micro-storage unit. They exchanged glances. Caspin said, "We're trying to save the community money." I replied, "So am I, by avoiding needless liability." They left with an uneasy half-threat that they would move forward anyway. I documented everything. My phone had been in my pocket recording, one-party consent where I live. I saved the audio to 2 cloud accounts plus an encrypted drive. Then I printed the relevant covenant pages and highlighted every access reference. I slid them into a bright red binder labeled, a little dramatically, "Gate, Shed." Call it overkill if you want. I grew up watching my mother win a nasty rural fence relocation dispute purely because her paperwork was immaculate. Legal reality. Organized paper beats raised voices 9 times out of 10. 2 days later, I received an email titled "Directive Regarding Shed Access." It accused me of hindering upkeep of the publicly enjoyed park strip and demanded I voluntarily remove any obstructions, including but not limited to the gate, latch, and locking mechanism, no later than 5 p.m. Friday. It threatened $50 per day if I continued non-cooperation. They CC'd the generic inbox of the out-of-town management company that mostly licks stamps for dues bills. I replied the same hour, A, the shed is private property, B. No easement. C. The clause cited is inapplicable. D. Any entry without permission will be trespass. E. Threatened fines without a noticed violation and hearing are unenforceable. Polite, precise, zero heat. That afternoon, my elderly neighbor, Mr. Hallen, wandered over while I was rolling up a hose. In a stage whisper, he told me he'd overheard Caspin at dawn telling the landscape crew foreman they would soon have a spot inside the corner lot to stash fertilizer bags so they wouldn't need to haul them weekly. Fertilizer. That flagged a different risk category. Chemicals, potential spills, runoff. I do not want nitrate soaking into the footing of my shed, or worse, volunteers traipsing in, someone slipping, and a personal injury claim finding its way to my homeowner's policy. Defense time. That night I, 1. Upgraded the gate hardware to a bolted steel hasp with a shrouded disc padlock resistant to bolt cutters. 2. Mounted a motion-activated camera angled down the inside line of the fence so the lens captures anyone at the latch. 3. Laminated and posted straightforward signage. Private property. No unauthorized entry. Recording in progress. Licensed access only. 4. Drafted a one-page conditional license agreement template that, if I chose to allow any limited storage, would require an insurance certificate naming me, an inventory log, a prohibition on storing fertilizers, fuels, or chemicals, and termination at my sole discretion with 24 hours notice. I had no intention of approving it yet. It was preemptive leverage. If they later claimed I was intransigent, I could show I offered a structured, safety-oriented pathway they declined. The next board meeting arrived. I went early, binder under my arm, and signed the sheet to speak. Shed Access Initiative sat third on the printed agenda. Members get 3 minutes. I used 2 minutes 50 seconds. I practiced. I laid out 1. No recorded easement. 2. Covenant maintenance access clause covers utilities drainage, not tool storage. 3. Fines require clear violations. 4. Annexing my shed shifts liability to me while conferring uncompensated benefit to the association. 5. Safer alternatives exist. Budgeted shed on common area or rented locker. I ended with, if you insist on pursuing private property requisition under color of authority, I will defend my rights. Caspin fired back that building new structures is not in the budget. Owner Reeves, quiet, observant, sits mid-row at every meeting, calmly asked where the surplus from the recent tree trimming contract went, since the invoice circulated by email was lower than the approved amount. That simple question produced a flicker in Caspin's composure. Dahlia immediately suggested tabling the directive for further legal review. They moved to an announced executive session, closed portion right afterward. Classic tactic: retreat, regroup, perhaps escalate quietly. Within a week, a certified letter they spent extra on postage for drama arrived labeled violation notice. It alleged my gate encroaches into an area dedicated to park access. False. That phrasing is dangerous because if unchallenged, it plants a narrative. I pulled the recorded plat map again, public record, highlighted the greenbelt boundary, stopping at my fence line, and printed an 11.17 enlargement with a transparent overlay. No dedicated path, no easement strip. I drafted a factual response. Alleging an encroachment without survey evidence could be construed as misrepresentation to induce relinquishment of property rights. Continued repetition after notice would force me to seek protective relief. Calm, not hostile. I sent it by email and certified mail back. Return receipt. The landscaper's crew then began leaving a narrow ribbon of grass directly behind my fence untrimmed. Transparent attempt to generate neighbor pressure. I neutered that by mowing it myself early Saturday and posting a friendly note on the community email list. Touched up the thin strip behind the corner lot for anyone walking the path. Happy to keep things tidy. Now, if the board tried to vilify me as obstructive, there existed a cheerful public record of the opposite. Quietly, I began door-to-door conversations. Script. The board asked me to remove my gate and let them store tools in my shed. I declined for liability and legal reasons. I have documents if you're curious. No petitions, no demands, just seeding awareness. Awareness is oxygen. When overreach later bursts into flame, oxygen determines whether it flashes out or becomes a bonfire illuminating everything. Then at 6:12 a.m. on a chilly weekday, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The camera captured Kirk, same reflective sunglasses, wearing a neon safety vest and holding what looked a lot like bolt cutters. He tested the lock, peered straight into the lens so I got a perfect frame of his face above the vest, lowered the cutters, snapped photos with his phone, and left. Less than a minute. I downloaded the clip, exported still images, and stored them redundantly. I did not confront him. Intercepting mid-attempt often only trains people to come back better prepared. Silent documentation is stronger. That afternoon, I sent the board my compromise, the conditional license agreement couched in diplomatic language about structured collaboration consistent with risk management norms. Requirements: insurance naming me, prohibition on fertilizers/fuels/chemicals, monthly inspection checklist, inventory log, indemnity clause, termination on my written notice. I knew they would reject it. That was the point. Dahlia replied, "Your conditions are burdensome and unnecessary. We expect voluntary cooperation." Perfect. I printed that email and slid it into the binder. Meanwhile, the financial subplot unfurled. Reeves approached me during a neighborhood yard sale, carrying a spiral notebook bristling with sticky flags. He said he had reconciled past budgets to actual expenditure reports and discovered a park enhancement reserve created the prior year had been partially drained for a line item labeled temporary equipment staging solution. No such equipment had ever appeared. No common shed erected. No inventory circulated. If a staging solution was funded, why pressure me to dismantle a gate now? We drafted a formal records inspection request. Our covenants allow owners to inspect financial records upon reasonable notice, specifying invoices, contracts, and bank statements supporting that reserve draw. While the countdown to the inspection ticked, a new front opened. Mr. Hallen received a notice claiming his low decorative lattice, an open grid supporting a flowering vine along his back fence, impedes potential future association improvements. The phrase potential future improvements made my scalp prickle. Were they laying rhetorical groundwork to justify carving a rear access corridor along the string of back fences, then arguing my gate removal was part of a broader improvement plan? If repeated enough, vague language hardens into presumed authority. I drafted notes on implied easement doctrine and how promptly, consistently objecting prevents any argument that owners acquiesced. Inspection day came. They tried to schedule it for a weekday morning, assuming working owners couldn't attend. I took personal leave. Reeves met me in the clubhouse conference room. They produced a single banker's box. Inside, loosely organized ledgers with gaps, a handful of invoices for small hand tools, 2 sets of pruning shears, gloves, 1 wheelbarrow, a receipt for decorative solar path lights, and a conspicuous absence of any invoice matching the largest temporary equipment staging solution withdrawal. We politely listed the missing documents and requested copies within 10 business days. Dahlia said they would circulate after legal vetting. Translation: stall. 2 mornings after the document inspection, the hazardous materials surprise arrived, though at first it just looked like stubborn litter. I stepped out with coffee and saw a white granular scatter line under a hairline gap at the back fence where soil had settled. A faint chemical tang rode the cool air. Not sharp like bleach, more like the smell when a big garden center opens plastic-wrapped pallets. I crouched. Prilled fertilizer pellets had trickled from the park side into my mulch bed, forming a thin fan shape right where rain runoff would sheet toward my French drain inlet. I followed the source by sight through the knothole spacing. 3 30-pound bags of high-nitrogen lawn product leaned upright against my fence, brand logo turned outward like a display. Clearly staged so volunteers wouldn't have to carry them from their truck each weekend, so they'd already begun using my fence line as an adjunct warehouse after being told no. I took slow, deliberate steps. First, wide-angle photos from my yard, including time display on a dry erase board. Learned that trick from an engineer friend. Put an external timestamp inside the frame so nobody can argue metadata fiddling. Then I used my phone, arm threaded through the lattice seam higher up, to capture the staging on the outside side of the fence. One bag had a small tear mid-seam, which explained the granular spill. I measured the spill width with a tape, wrote it down. Documentation creates narrative weight. Under ordinary circumstances, I might have brushed it up and moved on, but fertilizer against a private fence leaking into a private bed, after explicit emails refusing storage access, converts from annoyance into evidence pattern. I pulled up the State Environmental Quality Department site and verified the hotline process for reporting minor non-emergency potential runoff issues. I didn't want to escalate to hazmat theater. I wanted a quiet, factual inquiry that would produce an official communication record. I also called my homeowner's insurance agent, explained a board was pressuring me for storage, and now fertilizer was staged along my fence with spillage. She practically finished my sentence. Do not allow them inside. Potential premises liability. Get everything in writing. She noted any injury to a volunteer moving a bag across my property to their staged area could end up tendered against my policy, and my refusal letters would help disclaim any implied permission. She emailed me a summary. Into the binder it went. At 11:07 a.m. the same day, I sent the board a courteous notice. Fertilizer bags leaning against my fence constitute an unpermitted use. Spillage observed. Please remove within 24 hours. If not, I would mitigate and invoice costs plus seek enforcement of property rights. They didn't reply. The next morning, the bags still sat there, spill a little broader after a light overnight sprinkle. So I executed plan mitigate without touching their property. I laid down a sheet of contractor's paper inside my fence, gently swept the granules inside onto the paper, so removal showed I took reasonable care not to grind it into soil, bagged it, labeled the bag with date, time, sealed it, and placed it on a shelf in the shed, my property, as potential evidence. Documented each step in stills. Sent that sequence to the board. Removed spill inside my lot due to non-response. Staged materials outside remain your issue. Please refrain from further leaning or staging at my boundary. Later that week, Kirk tried a new tactic. Mid-afternoon, while I was on a remote work call with my headset, motion pings hit. He and Caspin together at my side gate, not with cutters, but with a cordless drill. You can see in the video, Kirk kneeling, bit poised near hinge screws. Caspin standing slightly angled lookout. I slipped my headset to mute, activated the gate's intercom, I had added a small battery-powered unit, and calmly said, "You are currently being recorded. Any tampering with a locked gate on private property will be treated as attempted trespass. Please step away." The way they jolted, bodies straightening, scramble of embarrassed limbs, would have been comical if it weren't so brazen. They left without touching the screws. I saved the clip under attempted entry #2 with redundant backups. That clip became the fulcrum for a measured escalation. I drafted a cease and desist notice of potential civil claims letter citing 1. Unauthorized attempts to access a secured area, 2 recorded incidents, 2 misstatements regarding an alleged park access encroachment, 3 placing or permitting placement of materials, fertilizer, causing spillage onto my property after refusal of storage. I didn't send it myself. I asked an attorney acquaintance, Armin, who enjoys precise letters, to put it on his letterhead as a courtesy. He added a crisp paragraph referencing state trespass statutes and potential director misconduct exposure if board members exceed powers as defined by the recorded covenants. The letter gave them a straightforward off-ramp. Confirm in writing within 7 days they would cease all attempts to access my gate or repurpose my shed, and correct the record about encroachment, and the matter ends. Otherwise, I would seek injunctive relief and statutory attorney fees. Our state statute grants them if an owner prevails to enforce rights under governing documents. They went silent again. Silence can be strategic, maybe fishing for my bluff. Silence also alienates neutral owners who by now were hearing summarized bits from others, because while I refrained from blasting every detail publicly, the fertilizer photos had leaked, pun intended, through casual coffee chats. Neighbors love a tidy quasi-mystery, and "why is the board obsessed with someone's shed?" is a more gripping porch conversation than new mulch color swatches. Meanwhile, the financial thread matured. The requested missing documents response period lapsed. They produced nothing further. Reeves and I prepared a petition for a special meeting to recall 2 directors, Caspin and Dahlia, per our bylaws section granting owners that power with signatures of 20%. My approach to signatures? Zero drama, maximum clarity. Here's what happened. A. Pressured for private shed access. B. Attempted bolt cutter entry. C. Attempted hinge removal. D. Fertilizer staging. E. Missing financial documentation. This petition compels a meeting where they can answer. Even owners who dislike conflict signed because the pattern, presented calmly, looked ugly. I added another plot line, the drainage compliance angle. The supposed rationale for park tool centralization was to maintain the greenbelt, yet the strip behind my fence, after I started mowing it, looked better than before. I collected weekly photos of the Greenbelt areas untouched by their claimed volunteer program, including an overgrown pocket behind the far end where stormwater enters the culvert. I compiled them into a dated collage. If they were genuinely focused on maintenance, why neglect the components they already controlled while devoting energy to annexing new storage? Hypocrisy is reputational acid. 7 days after Armin's letter, still no written assurance. So he filed a narrowly tailored complaint in county civil court, seeking declaratory and injunctive relief. Declaration that my gate and shed are private property, not subject to common access. Injunction against board members entering or directing entry. Recovery of attorney fees under the statute and governing documents. It included exhibits, plat map, my emails, their directive violation letter, stills of Kirk with cutters and drill, fertilizer scene, and a sworn affidavit by me describing events. Filing a lawsuit sounds nuclear. In HOA contexts, a sharply drawn, fact-rich, narrow claim often jolts a sloppy board into self-preservation mode, triggering insurance involvement and internal fracture. Directors and officers, D&O carriers, dislike uncovered willful misconduct. They push for de-escalation. Within 48 hours of service, then the board's association council, new name, not the management company, emailed offering mediation. They proposed dropping any access initiative if I dismiss without prejudice and sign a confidentiality clause. That final clause is where I said no. Silence would protect the pattern that fueled recall momentum. It would also muzzle my ability to present facts at the special meeting already triggered by the petition. We'd crossed the signature threshold. Their counsel tried to frame recall talk as retaliatory. I responded, owners exercising bylaw recall provisions because of documented overreach is lawful governance, not retaliation. Parallel to that, the Environmental Quality Department inspector, because of my minor runoff inquiry, scheduled a perfunctory site walk. He was professional, relaxed, and frankly seemed mildly annoyed to expend taxpayer time on small fertilizer spill drama. But he walked the Greenbelt with me, noted the leaning of the bags, they were still there, now damp and sagging, and made an on-the-spot recommendation that stored lawn chemicals be elevated on pallets, not resting in seasonal runoff zones and not leaned against private fences. He issued a simple advisory letter, not a fine, to the association email address on file. That single-page letter, outwardly bland, carried disproportionate narrative power, an independent authority telling them indirectly to stop doing what they were doing near my fence. When the advisory letter circulated, it had to record inspection rights again. A wave of owners who previously shrugged now saw an official agency name attached to the dispute. Suddenly, the issue was no longer just Caspin versus the gate person, but board actions triggered an outside inspector. People who fear property value ripples do not love hearing that their small association drew regulator attention over fertilizer staging. My doorbell rang more that week than during the holidays. I kept responses short. Yes, I refused unauthorized use. Yes, there's a recall meeting date now. You can read the documents yourself. Then came a pivot I didn't anticipate. Kirk resigned abruptly, citing personal reasons in a one-sentence email to owners. Subtext, he either recognized exposure from being on camera twice at my gate with tools or the insurer, looped in by their counsel, insisted someone fall on the sword to shrink risk. His resignation created a vacancy the board could attempt to fill by appointment before the recall meeting, but doing so risked fueling further anger. Dahlia sent an email praising his volunteer hours, which only reignited commentary threads asking what exactly those hours accomplished besides hovering near my hinges. I said nothing publicly. Silence can be as strategic as speech. The recall meeting date landed on a Saturday morning 3 weeks out. That lead time gave me and Reeves a window to assemble an owner information packet. We were meticulous to avoid defamation landmines. Every assertion footnoted to an attached document image or time-stamped video still. Section headings, not in a flashy pamphlet, just a clean stapled packet. 1. Chronology of shed access demands. 2. Governing document clauses, highlighted. 3. Evidence of attempted entry. 2 stills, face blurred just enough to show propriety yet still recognizable for those who'd already seen the unredacted clip in court filing, because we did not want accusations of publishing for humiliation. 4. Fertilizer staging advisory letter summary. 5. Outstanding financial documentation. Gaps. 6. Petition threshold achieved. 7. Proposed interim governance reforms. Transparent ledger posting, formal tool storage proposal on common land, third-party mini-audit. We distributed packets physically, stoops, and electronically, PDF link. Transparency erodes the standard "you're just stirring drama" defense. There is little oxygen left for vague counter-narratives when specifics saturate. 3 days before the meeting, another letter surfaced in my mailbox, this time not certified, from Caspin individually, not the board letterhead, asserting my relentless campaign was hurting community cohesion and suggesting if I simply donated a corner of the shed, the matter would end amicably. I scanned it, adding a note. Offer post-litigation initiation. Contains implicit quid pro quo. Decline. Into the binder. That binder by now had grown thick enough to feel like a municipal capital plan, and the simple sticker spine reading "Gate Shed" had become a quiet running joke. Neighbors would ask, "How's the volume count in the gate encyclopedia?" I'd smile. We're on chapter attempted hinge removal. The night before the recall meeting, heavy rain fell. I walked the interior perimeter with a flashlight and camera, partly habit, partly an instinctive stress bleed-off. At the fertilizer staging spot, the ground had cleaned itself. Stormwater had washed traces away. Another small irony, their insistence on cornering storage at my fence likely accelerated nutrient-rich runoff they claimed they were trying to manage with better volunteer landscaping practices. Morning of the recall meeting, I set up early in the clubhouse, a printed plat map enlarged on foam board, binder open to the timeline summary, laptop queued to muted clips ready if someone challenged authenticity. Owners trickled in. Murmurs swelled, energy curious and a little electric. I had no speaking role unless asked. Reeves would present the financial gaps. A retired compliance officer neighbor would address governance process. But as people saw the drill still frame of Kirk, vest bright, bit poised, whispered phrases like, "Can you believe?" rippled across the folding chairs. When the meeting was called to order, Dahlia attempted to frame the recall as a personal vendetta over a gate. Reeves calmly redirected. "This is about documented misuse of authority and record transparency. The gate is the visible symptom." He walked through each packet section crisp, almost auditorially detached. An owner who had never before spoken at any meeting stood and said he had begun withholding volunteer time because he felt gaslighted by narrative spin. Another asked point blank about the missing temporary equipment staging solution invoice. Caspin, face taut, said it was a vendor prepayment that fell through, and funds would be reallocated. That answer triggered a follow-up. "Where is the refund documentation?" Silence. Dahlia interjected about adjusting records later. The retired compliance officer then raised the advisory letter and asked why. If environmental best practices were a concern, the board left fertilizer leaning for weeks. No substantive answer. Then someone moved the recall question. Ballots, pre-printed yes-no, were collected, counted by 2 volunteers with me nowhere near the table to avoid claims of influence. Result? Recall carried for both Caspin and Dahlia by a margin wider than I'd predicted. Applause. Not raucous, more relieved. Bylaws required immediate removal upon certification. An interim 3-member panel, including Reeves, was voted in pending a full election cycle. In the back of the room, Caspin looked like a man whose mental map had shown a straight paved path, only to discover he'd been walking into a cul-de-sac all along. Consequences started layering quickly. The new interim board's first act: adopt a resolution disclaiming any interest in private gates, sheds, absent recorded easements, formally rescinding prior directives, and entering minutes acknowledging fertilizer staging was inappropriate, referencing the advisory letter rather than my name to keep it impersonal. Second act: issue a records demand, board to former directors, for all financial documentation, with a lawyer there clarifying personal liability risk if funds were misapplied. Third, instruct counsel to propose settlement of my lawsuit, including reimbursement of my reasonable attorney fees under the statute and a consent judgment declaratory order, because a stipulated order creates an enforceable court record, not just a handshake. My stance: I'd settle only if 1, consent judgment entered, 2, my fees covered, 3, association formally adopts handling and storage policy for landscaping materials on common land only, 4, association issues an owner-wide memo clarifying accurate scope of the maintenance access clause, 5, No confidentiality restrictions on factual history. They agreed, after some negotiation over fee line items. Attorneys will be attorneys. The insurer apparently had made it plain they would rather pay a modest fee reimbursement now than risk expanded claims if discovery unearthed more irregularities. One subtle but thickly poetic moment. While drafting the storage policy, an interim board member asked if I would review a proposed clause about seeking written permission before placing materials against any fence. I did so politely, made 2 word-level improvements, shall versus should, and reflected later how the entire arc had spun from a posture of, we expect voluntary cooperation, remove your gate, to, could you assist us with language ensuring boundaries are respected? It wasn't gloating, it was structural rebalancing. Punishment? Some readers expect handcuffs or dramatic perp walks. Real-life governance usually punishes through layered mundane friction, reputational erosion, formal recorded findings, cost reimbursements, lost authority, social capital drain. Caspin, facing both the public consent judgment and the pending financial reconciliation, which would later show a sloppy, undocumented cash withdrawal he insisted was a vendor hold, listed his property a month later. Listing description extolled peaceful community stewardship culture. Irony sometimes drives a gently used sedan. By the time a sale processed, several months down the line, the Greenbelt had a small, neat association-owned storage cabinet, 6 feet tall, anchored on a concrete pad poured entirely within common boundary, containing a published inventory sheet laminated inside the door, transparent, insured, locked. Not mine. During a casual evening walk weeks after the recall, Mr. Hallen waved from his gently trellised vine. The lattice notice had been voided. He said, "You protected the lines and we all benefit." I shrugged, because admitting satisfaction openly can sound smug. But inside, I cataloged the quiet satisfaction. We didn't just defend a gate. We reaffirmed in a microcosm that private property boundaries plus procedural accountability outlast improvised overreach, provided someone is willing to do the unglamorous, patient paperwork. And yes, the binder still occupies a shelf. I kept it not out of paranoia, but as community institutional memory, because power resets invite fresh attempts by future personalities to test edges, and precedent, clearly documented, is a prophylactic. I even added a final tab titled Resolution and Policy, containing the enacted storage policy, consent judgment copy, and fee reimbursement confirmation check stub. The physical heft of that binder is a tactile reminder that rights retained casually can sometimes evaporate silently, whereas rights defended carefully tend to calcify into norms everyone silently enjoys. There's one more layer, the small civil reimbursement claim the interim board filed against the former treasurer, a Caspin ally who had scribbled staging solution on a ledger line. After the mini-audit uncovered he'd authorized the dubious prepayment without dual signature. That led to a mediated agreement. He paid back the amount in installments plus a portion of the mini-audit cost. In exchange, no further action, quiet accountability. He stays in the neighborhood, lower profile, trimming his own hedges with personal tools that now return to his own garage when finished. Friends, thank you. See you soon.